International relations theory is the study of international relations from a theoretical perspective. It attempts to provide a conceptual framework upon which international relations can be analyzed. Ole Holsti describes international relations theories as acting like pairs of colored sunglasses that allow the wearer to see only salient events relevant to the theory. For example, an adherent of realism may completely disregard an event that a constructivist might pounce upon as crucial, and vice versa. The three most popular theories are realism, liberalism and constructivism. International relations theories can be divided into positivist rationalist theories which focus on a principally state-level analysis, and post-positivist reflectivist ones which incorporate expanded meanings of security, ranging from class, to gender, to post-colonial security. Many often conflicting ways of thinking exist in IR theory, including constructivism, institutionalism, Marxism, neo-Gramscianism, and others. However, two positivist schools of thought are most prevalent, realism and liberalism. Though increasingly, constructivism is becoming mainstream. Introduction. The study of international relations as theory can be traced to E. H. Carr's The 20 Years' Crisis, which was published in 1939, and to Hans Morgenthau's Politics Among Nations, published in 1948. International relations as a discipline is believed to have emerged after the First World War with the establishment of a chair of international relations at the University of Wales, Aberystwyth. Early international relations scholarship in the interwar years focused on the need for the balance of power system to be replaced with a system of collective security. These thinkers were later described as idealists. The leading critique of this school of thinking was the realist analysis offered by Carr. Explanatory and constitutive approaches in international relations theory is a distinction made when classifying international relations theories. Explanatory theories are ones which see the world as something external to theorize about it. A constitutive theory is one which believes that theories actually help construct the world. Realism. Realism or political realism has been the dominant theory of international relations since the conception of the discipline. The theory claims to rely upon an ancient tradition of thought which includes writers such as Thucydides, Machiavelli, and Hobbes. Early realism can be characterized as a reaction against interwar idealist thinking. The outbreak of World War II was seen by realists as evidence of the deficiencies of idealist thinking. There are various strands of modern-day realist thinking. However, the main tenets of the theory have been identified as statism, survival, and self-help. Statism. Realists believe that nation-states are the main actors in international politics. As such, it is a state-centric theory of international relations. This contrasts with liberal international relations theories which accommodate roles for non-state actors and international institutions. This difference is sometimes expressed by describing a realist worldview as one which sees nation-states as billiard balls. Liberals would consider relationships between states to be more of a cobweb. Survival. Realists believe that the international system is governed by anarchy, meaning that there is no central authority. Therefore, international politics is a struggle for power between self-interested states. Self-help. Realists believe that no other states can be relied upon to help guarantee the state's survival. Realism makes several key assumptions. It assumes that nation-states are unitary, geographically based actors in an anarchic international system with no authority above capable of regulating interactions between states, as no true authoritative world government exists. Secondly, it assumes that sovereign states, rather than IGOs, NGOs or MNCs, are the primary actors in international affairs. Thus, states, as the highest order, are in competition with one another. As such, a state acts as a rational autonomous actor in pursuit of its own self-interest with a primary goal to maintain and ensure its own security and thus its sovereignty and survival. Realism holds that in pursuit of their interests, states will attempt to amass resources, and that relations between states are determined by their relative levels of power. That level of power is in turn determined by the state's military, economic, and political capabilities. Some realists believe that states are inherently aggressive, that territorial expansion is constrained only by opposing powers, while others believe that states are obsessed with the security and continuation of the state's existence. The defensive view can lead to a security dilemma where increasing one's own security can bring along greater instability as the opponent, builds up its own arms, making security a zero-sum game where only relative gains can be made. Neo-Realism. Neo-realism or structural realism is a development of realism advanced by Kenneth Waltz in Theory of International Politics. It is, however, only one strand of neo-realism. Joseph Grieco has combined neo-realist thinking with more traditional realists. This strand of theory is sometimes called modern realism. Waltz's neo-realism contends that the effect of structure must be taken into account in explaining state behavior. Structure is defined twofold as A, the ordering principle of the international system which is anarchy, and B, the distribution of capabilities across units. Waltz also challenges traditional realism's emphasis on traditional military power, instead characterizing power in terms of the combined capabilities of the state. Liberalism. The precursor to liberal international relations theory was idealism. Idealism was viewed critically by those who saw themselves as realists, for instance E. H. Carr. In international relations, idealism is a school of thought that holds that a state should make its internal political philosophy the goal of its foreign policy. For example, an idealist might believe that ending poverty at home should be coupled with tackling poverty abroad. Wilson's idealism was a precursor to liberal international relations theory, which would arise amongst the institution builders after World War II. Liberalism holds that state preferences, rather than state capabilities, are the primary determinant of state behavior. Unlike realism, where the state is seen as a unitary actor, liberalism allows for plurality in state actions. Thus, preferences will vary from state to state, depending on factors such as culture, economic system or government type. Liberalism also holds that interaction between states is not limited to the political security, but also economic cultural, whether through commercial firms, organizations or individuals. Thus, instead of an anarchic international system, there are plenty of opportunities for cooperation and broader notions of power, such as cultural capital. Another assumption is that absolute gains can be made through cooperation and interdependency, thus peace can be achieved. The democratic peace theory argues that liberal democracies have never made war on one another and have fewer conflicts among themselves. This is seen as contradicting especially the realist theories, and this empirical claim is now one of the great disputes in political science. Numerous explanations have been proposed for the democratic peace. It has also been argued, as in the book Never at War, that democracies conduct diplomacy in general very differently from non-democracies. Realists disagree with liberals over the theory, often citing structural reasons for the peace, as opposed to the state's government. Sebastian Rosato, a critic of democratic peace theory, points to America's behavior towards left-leaning democracies in Latin America during the Cold War to challenge democratic peace. One argument is that economic interdependence makes war between trading partners less likely. In contrast, realists claim that economic interdependence increases rather than decreases the likelihood of conflict. Neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, liberal institutionalism or neoliberal institutionalism is an advancement of liberal thinking. It argues that international institutions can allow nations to successfully cooperate in the international system. Post-liberalism, one version of post-liberal theory, argues that within the modern, globalized world, states in fact are driven to cooperate in order to ensure security and sovereign interests. The departure from classical liberal theory is most notably felt in the reinterpretation of the concepts of sovereignty and autonomy. Autonomy becomes a problematic concept in shifting away from a notion of freedom, self-determination, and agency to a heavily responsible and duty-laden concept. Importantly, autonomy is linked to a capacity for good governance. Similarly, sovereignty also experiences a shift from a right to a duty. In the global economy, international organizations hold sovereign states to account, leading to a situation where sovereignty is co-produced among sovereign states. The concept becomes a variable capacity of good governance and can no longer be accepted as an absolute right. One possible way to interpret this theory is the idea that in order to maintain global stability and security and solve the problem of the anarchic world system in international relations, no overarching, global, sovereign authority is created. Instead, states collectively abandon some rights for full autonomy and sovereignty. Another version of post-liberalism, drawing on work in political philosophy after the end of the Cold War, as well as on democratic transitions in particular in Latin America, argues that social forces from below are essential in understanding the nature of the state and the international system. Without understanding their contribution to political order and its progressive possibilities, particularly in the area of peace in local and international frameworks, the weaknesses of the state, the failings of the liberal peace, and challenges to global governance cannot be realized or properly understood. Furthermore, the impact of social forces on political and economic power, structures, and institutions, provides some empirical evidence of the complex shifts currently underway in IR. Constructivism. Constructivism or social constructivism has been described as a challenge to the dominance of neoliberal and neo-realist international relations theories. Michael Barnett describes constructivist international relations theories as being concerned with how ideas define international structure, how the structure defines the interests and identities of states and how states and non-state actors reproduce this structure. The key element of constructivism is the belief that international politics is shaped by persuasive ideas, collective values, culture, and social identities. Constructivism argues that international reality is socially constructed by cognitive structures which give meaning to the material world. The theory emerged from debates concerning the scientific method of international relations theories and theory's role in the production of international power. Immanuel states that constructivism occupies a middle ground between rationalist and interpretative theories of international relations. The failure of either realism or liberalism to predict the end of the Cold War boosted the credibility of constructivist theory. Constructivist theory criticizes the static assumptions of traditional international relations theory and emphasizes that international relations is a social construction. Constructivism is a theory critical of the ontological basis of rationalist theories of international relations. Whereas realism deals mainly with security and material power, and liberalism looks primarily at economic interdependence and domestic-level factors, constructivism most concerns itself with the role of ideas in shaping the international system. By ideas, constructivists refer to the goals, threats, fears, identities, and other elements of perceived reality that influence states and non-state actors within the international system. Constructivists believe that these ideational factors can often have far-reaching effects, and that they can trump materialistic power concerns. For example, constructivists note that an increase in the size of the U.S. military is likely to be viewed with much greater concern in Cuba, a traditional antagonist of the U.S., than in Canada, a close U.S. ally. Therefore, there must be perceptions at work in shaping international outcomes. As such, constructivists do not see anarchy as the invariable foundation of the international system, but rather argue, in the words of Alexander Wendt, that anarchy is what states make of it. Constructivists also believe that social norms shape and change foreign policy over time rather than security, which realists cite. Marxism and critical theory. Marxist and neo-Marxist international relations theories are structuralist paradigms which reject the realist liberal view of state conflict or cooperation, instead focusing on the economic and material aspects. Marxist approaches argue the position of historical materialism and make the assumption that the economic concerns transcend others, allowing for the elevation of class as the focus of study. Marxists view the international system as an integrated capitalist system in pursuit of capital accumulation. A subdiscipline of Marxist IR is critical security studies. Gramscian approaches rely on the ideas of Italian Antonio Gramsci, whose writings concern the hegemony that capitalism holds as an ideology. Marxist approaches have also inspired critical theorists such as Robert W. Cox, who argues that theory is always for someone and for some purpose. One notable Marxist approach to international relations theory is Immanuel Wallerstein's world system theory, which can be traced back to the ideas expressed by Lenin in Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. World system theory argues that globalized capitalism has created a core of modern industrialized countries which exploit a periphery of exploited third world countries. These ideas were developed by the Latin American dependency school. Neo-Marxist, or new Marxist approaches have returned to the writings of Karl Marx for their inspiration. Key new Marxists include Justin Rosenberg and Benno Teschke. Marxist approaches have enjoyed a renaissance since the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. Criticisms of Marxists' approaches to international relations theory include the narrow focus on material and economic aspects of life. Feminism. Feminist approaches to international relations became popular in the early 1990s. Such approaches emphasize that women's experiences continue to be excluded from the study of international relations. International relations feminists who argue that gender relations are integral to international relations focus on the role of diplomatic wives and marital relationship that facilitate sex trafficking. Early feminist IR approaches were part of the third great debate between positivists and post-positivists. They argued against what they saw as the positivism and state-centrism of mainstream international relations. Christian Reus-Smit argues that these approaches did not describe what a feminist perspective on world politics would look like. The feminist international relations scholar Jackie True differentiates between empirical feminism, analytical feminism and normative feminism. Empirical feminism sees women and gender relations as empirical aspects of international relations. It is argued that mainstream international relations emphasis on anarchy and statecraft mean that areas of study that make the reproduction of the state system possible are marginalized. Analytical feminism claims that the theoretical framework of international relations has a gender bias. Here gender refers not to the biological differences between men and women but the social constructs of masculine and feminine identity. It is claimed that in mainstream international relations masculinity is associated with objectivity. Analytical feminists would see neo-realism's dislike of domestic explanations for explaining interstate behavior as an example of this bias. Normative feminist sees theorizing as part of an agenda for change. Criticisms of feminist international relations theory include its portrayal of third world women. Feminist international relations is sometimes oversimplified into a women's issue or simply a need to add women and stir masculinities, IR and the gender variable a cost-benefit analysis for gender skeptics, an article by Charlotte Hooper, makes the case that looking at international relations through a gendered lens is important for all genders. The article illustrates that the hypermasculinity used in international relations has a negative impact on all genders. It privileges only a certain kind of man, forcing all others to fit into the constraints of one vision of masculinity. Hooper also argues that this gendered lens requires a complete overhaul of traditional methods, rather than just adding women to the study. In order to investigate the intersections between gender identities and international relations, one cannot rely on approaches which would take gender identities as givens or as independent, externally derived variables. Traditional methods do not meet the needs of men or women. They attempt to reduce our needs to security, failing to take into account class, education level, gender, or experience. Hooper argues that traditional studies of international relations are causing us to miss many factors for more than just women and children. To appeal to sympathetic skeptics, Hooper explains that international relations shapes masculinity in a way that affects us all. To establish this, she explains that masculinity and femininity are social constructs that can be influenced by theories and discourse. Hooper turns so-called feminist international relations into gendered international relations, which brings in all people and highlights the importance of new methods to the field. Genders, just like class, ethnicity, age, etc., can help inform our understanding of how people and nations act, and if we ignore the range of masculinities and femininities we are only working with half the puzzle. The system that feminist international relations is trying to subvert affects us all and influences many of our traditional theories. Hooper offers the example of war which has shaped the male body. It has created men as takers of life and women as givers of it. We proceed to tell men they simply have more natural aggression. Hooper also illustrates the ways masculinity, like femininity, has been influenced by colonization. The hierarchy formed by colonization labels Asians as effeminate, Africans as savage and white men as the proper balance at the top of the hierarchy. War and colonialism still influence international relations to a huge extent. It is important to realize that feminist international relations or a gendered lens is not just for women, but is a relevant theory that can help us all. Green theory. Alternative approaches. English school. The English School of International Relations Theory, also known as International Society, Liberal Realism, Rationalism or the British Institutionalists, maintains that there is a society of states at the international level, despite the condition of anarchy. Despite being called the English School, many of the academics from this school were neither English nor from the United Kingdom. A great deal of the work of the English School concerns the examination of traditions of past international theory, casting it, as Martin White did in his 1950s-era lectures at the London School of Economics, into three divisions: 1. Realist or Hobbesian, 2. Rationalist, 3. Revolutionist. In broad terms, the English school itself has supported the rationalist or Grotian tradition, seeking a middle way between the power politics of realism and the utopianism of revolutionism. The English school reject behavioralist approaches to international relations theory. The international relations theories have become a typical learning of the fundamental insight and origin of international relations. Functionalism. Functionalism is a theory of international relations that arose principally from the experience of European integration. Rather than the self-interest that realists see as a motivating factor, functionalists focus on common interests shared by states. Integration develops its own internal dynamic. As states integrate in limited functional or technical areas, they increasingly find that momentum for further rounds of integration in related areas. This invisible hand of integration phenomenon is termed spillover. Although integration can be resisted, it becomes harder to stop integration's reach as it progresses. This usage, and the usage in functionalism in international relations, is the less common meaning of functionalism. More commonly, however, functionalism is an argument that explains phenomena as functions of a system rather than an actor or actors. Immanuel Wallerstein employed a functionalist theory when he argued that the Westphalian international political system arose to secure and protect the developing international capitalist system. His theory is called functionalist, because it says that an event was a function of the preferences of a system and not the preferences of an agent. Functionalism is different from structural or realist arguments in that while both look to broader, structural causes, realists say that the structure gives incentives to agents, while functionalists attribute causal power to the system itself, bypassing agents entirely. State cartel theory. State cartel theory in international relations is derived from an old institutional theory of economics, from the theory of private or enterprise cartels. It has a German background, because Germany was formerly the land of highest developed economic cartels and the motherland of classical cartel theory. State cartel theory uses a mix of methods ranging from positivist data evaluation to critical socio-economic analyses or reflexive methods like criticism of thinking or ideology. Among the other theories of international relations, state cartel theory has most in common with functionalism in international relations. A bit more than the latter, state cartel theory has its focus on a theory of international organizations. Post-structuralism. Post-structuralism differs from most other approaches to international politics because it does not see itself as a theory, school or paradigm which produces a single account of the subject matter. Instead, post-structuralism is an approach, attitude, or ethos that pursues critique in a particular way. Post-structuralism sees critique as an inherently positive exercise that establishes the conditions of possibility for pursuing alternatives. Post-modernism. Postmodernist approaches to international relations are critical of meta-narratives and denounces traditional IR's claims to truth and neutrality. Post-colonialism. Post-colonial international relations scholarship posits a critical theory approach to international relations, and is a non-mainstream area of international relations scholarship. Post-colonialism focuses on the persistence of colonial forms of power and the continuing existence of racism in world politics. Evolutionary perspectives. Evolutionary perspectives, such as from evolutionary psychology, have been argued to help explain many features of international relations. Humans in the ancestral environment did not live in states and likely rarely had interactions with groups outside of a very local area. However, a variety of evolved psychological mechanisms, in particular those for dealing with intergroup interactions, are argued to influence current international relations. These include evolved mechanisms for social exchange, cheating and detecting cheating, status conflicts, leadership, in-group and out-group distinction and biases, coalitions, and violence. Evolutionary concepts such as inclusive fitness may help explain seeming limitations of a concept such as egotism, which is of fundamental importance to realist and rational choice international relations theories. See also, Diplomatic History, International Legal Theory, List of scholarly journals in international relations, Foreign Interventionism, References. Further reading, Bailey, John. Steve Smith. And Patricia Owens. The Globalization of World Politics, OUP, 4th edition. Burchell, A.L. eds. Theories of International Relations, 3rd edition, Palgrave, ISBN 1-4039-4866-6, Chernoff, Fred. Theory and Meta-Theory in International Relations, Concepts and Contending Accounts, Palgrave Macmillan. Geilhot Nicholas, ed. The Invention of International Relations Theory, Realism, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the 1954 Conference on Theory. Hedley Bull, The Anarchical Society, Columbia University Press. Jackson, Robert H., and Georg Zarentz. An Introduction to International Relations, Theories and Approaches, Oxford, OUP, 5th ed. Morgenthaler, Hans. Politics Among Nations, Petman, Ralph. World Affairs. An Analytical Overview, World Scientific Publishing Company, ISBN 98142933873. Waltz, Kenneth. Theory of International Politics, Waltz, Kenneth. Man, the State, and War, Columbia University Press. Weber, Cynthia. International Relations Theory. A Critical Introduction, 2nd edition, Taylor and Francis, ISBN 0-415-34208-2, Wendt, Alexander. Social Theory of International Politics, Cambridge University Press. External links, Theory Talks, interviews with key IR theorists, the Martin Institute, a discussion and overview of IR theory and its historical roots at American University.